So welcome everyone to now the 15th edition of Saas Talks. We never thought we'll get to 15. I think 10 was the number high bar we had at least in our mind, but we have continued so far thanks to support from all of you. Just to set the expectation for the discussion today, as I've always repeated in every call, it is a discussion. It is not a panel. It is not a rags to riches story, etc. We discuss one functional topic. Intent is to get deeper into the what, how, why, when kind of questions around that topic. And we choose a different topic, of course, every time. And in each of these sessions, we have one or two anchor guests, and I'm going to introduce both of you shortly. Intent is for me to ask the first few questions to set the stage. But after the first 10 to 15 minutes, it's an open discussion. Anybody can answer questions. Anybody can ask questions. People can raise their hands. If they're not shy, they can actually come on the screen as well. Any of those formats is all fair game as the discussion progresses. The only request to everyone is that please stay on the topic. And today's topic, therefore, is product analytics and instrumentation. I'll give just a quick background. Is that in a number of companies, at least that we back, we find that it takes a certain amount of effort for founders to figure out what is it about their product that they should measure, particularly when it comes to user behavior, user engagement. And there are a bunch of questions, which is what should we do? When should we do? How should we do? How much does it cost? Which are the right tools? All those kinds of questions sort of begin to come. Are we measuring too much? Are we measuring too little? So intent of today's discussion is actually to go deeper into this topic. With that, let me introduce the two anchor guests for today. I'll begin with Deepak Diwakar. And this is a continuous sort of sob story on my side that I met Deepak back in 2013 when you guys were still in that small house in Pune, I remember. You guys have done a fabulous job. He's one of the co-founders of MindTickle. Specifically, the entire engineering technology part is what Deepak leads. I have known him now for 8 years, have had a lot of discussions on a lot of topics, learned a lot, and looking forward to learning from you on the topic today. And I think prior to MindTickle, you were at PubMatic is what I remember for a few years. So welcome, Deepak. And also want to introduce Praveen Das. Praveen is the co-founder of Factors.ai. And as we will hear from him soon, his current company is actually quite related to the topic we're discussing as well. In addition, Praveen has had a long history of building large global scale products in the past. He was part of InMobi in the past. And now, as I said, the co-founder of Factors.ai. So welcome, Praveen, to the call as well. So with that, let's get started. I'm going to, as I said, I'm going to ask you the first few questions. We'll keep it to 10, 12 minutes, and then we will open it up to everyone. So Deepak, I'm going to begin with you. I vaguely remember that you guys began in 2011-12. I know it was a different product. You were doing HR onboarding at that point in time. You pivoted into sales readiness at one point in time, but I'm curious to understand at what point in your early journey or late journey did you begin to think that, you know, we need to be able to measure the user engagement and behavior at a deeper level? And when did you begin to instrument your product to be able to measure or monitor?
Thanks for intro, Alok, and thanks for asking this question. First, admitting, and early on when you start, now there's a lot of awareness, right? The bigger problem is actually knowing that, oh, we have to measure and what to measure. How comes second. And early on, think about back in 2011 and 12, you would know Google Analytics, and Mixpanel was like recently born. You don't know much. There wasn't much. What do you know? Oh, let's measure DAU, MAU. Let's measure. If you the engagement is like how many sign in, sign up, right? Number of time people spend, right? That's like a basic thing you had that time from application perspective, APMs, New Relic was there, AppD was there, right? So that's the standard people used to do, right? What happened is basically the both the thought process that what actually that matters to measure, and uh, so that got evolved slowly. And if I honestly say, in last 3 years, is potentially, I would say that I got enlightened that what really actually matters to measure, and then realized that, oh, this we should have understood. I should have understood long back.
So Deepak, give an example. I want to go back. See, you had a product which was allowing organizations to do onboarding of new employees, like way back.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
If at that point you wanted to know how much your product is being used, how it is being used, how did you do it at that point in time?
So those, see, the thing is, the very surface level measurement everyone understands. Like, hey, how many signups are there in every month, right? Okay, every day, how many signups people do, how much time they're spending, right? Okay, so these kind of thing we used to do. We know that, okay, this many licenses we sold, right? Out of that, what's their active user per day, per month, right? Kind of that. Okay, what is the intended for the end user to do? Have they done that in that time frame or not, right? So those are like very the obvious one. Started understanding and we started doing that, right? The level of complexity starts, actually I would say it started when we actually transform into, let's say, sales domain, right? And when we translate it into the sales domain, then and then there are generally in a SaaS product, there are at least two different users. One is person who in most of the cases, not necessarily in every cases, one of the in our scenarios, the one person who does administrative work, a lot of administrative work, like creating program initiatives, driving that, and then the other part where end user who consumes those contents. So the 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 important aspect started growing when you grow. For example, oh, you had 1 million revenue, now you're growing for 3x 4x, right? When you're growing for next set of customer base, then these becomes a vanity metrics. The crux that you started thinking of your churn number, right? And then churn number, you started saying in a product, right? The only metrics a lot of people knows is NPS, right? Hey, let's get an NPS and we get an idea that, hey, what's happening. But when you really go into growth phase, right, NPS is a lagging indicator. You will know something is already broken. You will not know something is already right. What you need is typically a metrics which helps you give you a 6 month in hand. If someone is churning, they would churn renewal, say almost 3 quarters before already. They're planning, they're migrating, right? So if you know 6 months before, you will have at least another 3 months to done, right? So those kind of started thinking, actually started, we started hunting on that area, right? What really matters in your, and that's basically, think about, that's a North Star thought process, right? And a lot actually lies into the product uses itself. Obviously there are other framework, your relationships and all, financial metrics matters. But what we said that, hey, the type of users that are growing, is there is there a framework and metrics we can figure it out? Maybe stringent, right? Maybe harsher on us, but give a systematic idea of a churn. Give a 6 month advance in a churn. And yes, it was, I would say the team put a lot of effort. It was a 6-7 months of effort modeling all number of data. We came out with the product magic metrics. We call it just like a SaaS magic metrics. So we call it a product magic metrics. we came down that correlations very well. That helped us a lot, like that metrics like helped us a lot on that front, that hey, and we knew like if you some of the CSMs were not aware, oh, this is going to be potential churn, right? And that flag helped actually recover those accounts. So this is a kind of a progression we understood over the time, that hey, there are 2, 3, 4 different elements. One is the what ultimately matters to you. Can your product metrics actually kind of connect to your business? It's a difficult, tough problem. I don't know if it can be generalized, but it definitely lies with the data.
Got it. Deepak, I'm actually going to come back to your churn comment a little bit later. I have that in my mind, but Praveen, I want to shift to you. I know that you have built many products actually in your career, right? And now you happen to be a startup founder yourself, building your own product. I'm keen that in the short time frame that you have taken your journey so far, and I'm referring to Factors.ai, not necessarily going back to your InMobi days for a minute, but have you thought about product analytics and instrumentation at this stage itself, or do you think that that's something you will do later? Keen to get your perspective.
Yeah, so yeah, just to kind of give the audience a sense of about Factors as well. So we're not like a product-led growth model, because I think some of these things become very relevant if you're like a small ticket size PLG, like $10 sign up sort of a product, right? So our product is more of a involved sort of purchase process. We have fewer accounts, but in like a a $10,000 to $20,000 ACV sort of a price point, just so that's kind of clear. Now, the way I have thought about it, Alok, is there are 3-4 aspects, especially at the earliest stages, that you really want to measure, right? One of them is just the experience of the product, right? So how are people using the product? And we are not yet at a stage where like I can actually count and recollect every single client. I have a call with them like every couple of weeks. So analytics, it's not yet reached a stage where it's beyond what I can comprehend. So at this stage, I track experience inside the product, which I find screen recording sort of solutions to be far more informative in terms of qualitative information on how people are navigating, what's confusing, what's not confusing, and so on and so forth, right? What we have instrumented a lot though is 2 things. So one is error states in the product, experience which you do not expect to happen at all, which really lets down the client, right? You've made a commitment and you're letting them down. So we instrument those scenarios to say whenever that happens, we should know, and then we should be able to kind of debug and figure out what's happening and be proactive in terms of responding to them, saying, hey, we know there was an issue yesterday, we figured that out and we're going to fix that. And the second is, at least we are also building an analytics product. So there is another commitment that we make, which is most of the times when you run an analysis, it will come back in a certain time frame. So that's one metric that we very rigorously monitor, like what's like your P95 latency for a sort of feature, right? The engagement side, I'd say we are way too early at this stage for that to be like a problem, because we practically know how that is. Having said that, that's something that we will now start to implement as we scale, so that it doesn't remain like it's not just for one person, but for the full team to know that this is how our engagement levels are. So tracking engagement or churn are not the kind of problems that I worry about right now. It's mostly around experience, situations which are not expected to happen, which happen, and a certain commitment that you have as a product. It may be anything, right? So for us, that commitment is when you run a query, you'll get back in a certain time. Just keeping that as a metric to say, is that happening the way it is expected to happen?
Got it. I know that I have already exceeded my welcome on the questions. I will ask one more just to keep the continuity, but just a note to all the audience members, please feel free to put your questions either on the Q&A panel now, or if you just raise your hand, either Arpit or I can actually bring you into the call as well. So I know that you guys will not be shy. So feel free to put your questions now. I do have a question, and I promise to make it the last one for some time now, which is that I think both of you have referred to product instrumentation for 3 different reasons. there is a side of product instrumentation that you do to be able to figure out the churn. I think of that on the customer or the revenue side goal. Right? That's one. You want to know 6 months ahead of time whether somebody is going to churn or not. That's one. Second is you want to do it from a dev perspective, because you want to know that, well, it's also an experience, but whether it's about latency or about bugs, things that should not happen, so that you can debug things later. So you do certain level of instrumentation in your product because of that. And there's a third that you do to be able to understand the user behavior, because that's going to be helpful for you to figure out what product should you build or not build, or what features to prioritize, etc. Right? And I'm assuming that between the PM and the VP of engineering and head of customer success or revenue, there are different stakeholders, right? Actually, the question is that when you think about product instrumentation, do the different stakeholders give you different objectives, and you begin to instrument the product differently for these three stakeholders, and who drives the agenda and who fulfills that agenda? And either of you, please feel free.
Again, Alok, I just go first. I think from our side at this stage, the company is relatively small enough that the multiple stakeholders as a issue doesn't really come up. For us right now, it's mostly experience and commitment to a customer, right? Like what is that commitment? What are those metrics that we need to track? And hence we know that we are kind of delivering on that commitment. So at this stage for us, it's relatively simple and straightforward in that sense. But in previous sort of roles, those issues do come up where you have, different stakeholders who pull you in different directions. And I'm sure people can talk to that a lot more.
Yeah, correct. Thanks, Praveen. So I'll take it at the first and fundamental, so my learning over the time, the first and fundamental mistakes and challenge is basically aligning what to build. Once you really know what to build, and if you build, what is the success metrics to it? I'll give you an example in live and from MindTickle. We, hopefully some of you might have seen, we launched a conversational intelligence product, a bot. And then bot is like, hey, join a sales call, be a assistant to the sales rep, do ABC, whatsoever, all those, right? So what is the success metrics of the key metrics of the bot? So it took some time, but what is important when you understand that, hey, ultimately, why did you build this bot? You build this bot that it has to join almost 100% of the call before time, not delayed, right? Before time, right? So, and then once it joins, it actually at the end serves ABC, right? So metrics that we decided for this is the bot, because you have to do mathematically, right? So bot should join 99.99% of the time, 30 seconds before every call. So this definition, we lost a lot of time miss, and we think, 30 seconds before is an engineering problem, right? And this the 99.9% maybe is the product problem, right? This is a fundamental mistake. How do you define that metrics, which itself drive everything, is the fundamental mistake that lot of we have been also doing in the past. We understood and we kind of corrected that, the whole thought process, right? So this combines you everyone together, rather than thinking there's a product PM ownership, a VP engineering ownership. No, it just combines you the one key phrase, right? You put down those elements, different dashboards to prove that. But that's how you should define the success metrics.
Sorry, Deepak, I am confused. So who defines these success metrics now?
This is where, right, for example, this is where the product manager and the VP engineering, right, together has to own that, hey, we build it why? Nowadays, what happened, like, for example, we invested in product ops 5 years before. So you should, one thing that I will promote, because there has to be one person who is really, really after these metrics. Why of these metrics? What happened to these metrics? If you can afford to hire a product ops person, do that. Which kind of bind them, right? Put them this philosophy of understanding this.
understand. In fact, I'm going to come to the product ops question as well. I want to welcome Manasej also to the call. Manasej is the founder of Zapscale, and he is trying to solve actually many of the product analytics. He's trying to solve analytics problem both from a product and a customer success perspective. And Manasej, if I'm not doing justice, feel free to introduce Zapscale to others. He was also the founder of ThreadSoul, which he exited. So I know he brings a lot of experience in building SaaS companies. But I know that there were some thoughts, Manasej, you wanted to share. So I would rather that you share with everyone. So over to you.
Thanks a lot, Alok, for putting me in the business class. Really appreciate it. I was back in the economy. Great to see you guys here. Thanks a lot for taking me in. My experience of looking into the product analytics basically came from my last startup, which is basically a SaaS business for apparel tech. Believe me, there's a thing like that. So I was really obsessed about finding more and more data about what our customers were doing on the product. So we ended up looking at finding actually mixed panel and segment both for our businesses, but not before I looked into Amplitude, Pendo, User IQ, Full Story, Hotjar, Tealeaf, CleverTap, the entire segment out there. Even after having mixed panel and segment where we were able to get the entire engagement metrics very clearly, the A/B testing metrics very clearly, and also the insights from the customer data platforms clearly, there was one major problem which always remained and lingered with our entire user analytics, which is I don't know when the users changed behavior and if that change of behavior we could capture in certain ways. So that actually got us to do a very interesting long-term project internally where we built a bunch of statistical models with lots of statistical tests, including tests which are from our statistical old days of Z-tests, T-tests, to basically figure out if the behavior has changed significantly for me to worry about a possible churn candidate is on the offing or not. And that's what we did actually. And that got us a very interesting perspective. It got us more data and more understanding. And if you can allow me, I can just show you one or two very cool, simple examples to kind of like build on what I was talking about. Is that acceptable to?
Yeah, you're going to do a screen share now?
Yeah. I'll do a quick screen share.
So Manasej, I think let's stay off the screen share for in this call. So.
Okay, so let me kind of put you what I used to do typically. So one example would be, imagine Deepak comes into our software every day and spends, let's say, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 25 minutes, 37 minutes. So we know Deepak's last month's entire history of how much time he has spent in the product. And this week he has spent some X amount of time. The question is Deepak's behavior of spending time on my product radically different from what he was having last month? Now that question is a statistical question. You cannot answer it just by looking at the means, like the average amount of time and spent. So you need to look into mean plus standard deviation and actually undergo a test called Z-test, which will basically tell you that, you know what, you have one sample of data and then you have another sample of data to compare with. And are these two data samples from the same population or not? If they're divergent, we will get that and understand that Deepak has fundamentally changed his behavior for certain things. And then that's a cue for the customer success team to actually go and tail Deepak and figure out what is the reason that he's not spending as much amount of time. The same thing you can do, by the way, for, let's say, reports. I would want, say, Praveen to download 100 reports per week. And then we can basically set the same thing for Alok and Arpit and everybody on this call, right? And then we can do what's the expected number, what's the deviation number? Is that statistically significant enough for me to worry about it? It's called an ANOVA test. And the same thing we do for all our, same things are done for the vaccinations and everything else. So we basically use the same statistics to figure out if there is some significant user behavior change, which would actually foretell a possible churn for me. Because as you mentioned, Deepak, the NPS or a CSAT is always a lagging indicator. The thing has already happened by that time, right? So how to find the leading indicators? And I thought the statistics gave us some extremely amazing insights. And that got us to a point that in 4.5 years, we lost only 1.5% customers on a year-on-year basis, which is just pretty nice actually for our business.
Got it.
Yeah. Just one thing. Ravi Teja is also on the call. And I had actually requested him, Ravi, while I don't want to put you on the spot, if you're okay in being on the screen, please do raise your hands. Otherwise, of course, I'll not take the liberty. But if you're okay, would love to actually bring you in on the screen. In the meantime, might be worth just answering a few questions from the people on the Q&A panel as well. There's one question, Deepak, for you specifically from Anand. Can we get some better idea for different user types and whether KPIs differ for the user type? I guess the broader question is that when you do define the success metrics, do you basically segment the user base also and define these success metrics differently for different users?
Yeah. You have to. I'll give you probably the example from our company itself. So we are in the sales enablement space, right? And the objective for the stakeholder are sales rep, which think about from the top. Think about let's say from a VP sales or CXO perspective, when they change the sales motion, they want their every rep to be really aligned with the new sales motion. So their objective KPI is, hey, have my every single one has actually switched to the new sales motion. Now, who drive this initiative? Let's say VP of Sales Enablement. Their objective is, hey, if I have translated this into the right program, so that translation is their objective, right? And is it mapping? Means if I translate it in this program, then is this program successful? So when you think of this program successful, this program have a length of a month, quarter, or whatsoever, right? You look for basically, let's say a final practice or some ROI that. Then the person goes in the real admin guy who really doing this content creation, workflow, integrations, blah, blah, right? The time effort that person has put. From them, adoption metrics matters. That, hey, if I added, let's say 20,000 rep, is adoption is 80%, 60%, right? So see the metrics KPI matters and you segregate that. For an end user perspective, you look for that, hey, that is the top objective. You wanted them to aware of that, right? You look for how engaged that person was through the process. And has that person find it useful when they're actually demonstrating it. So that's how you define this complete different user segment and metrics. And then you try to see your some data point is inside the system, some data point doesn't lie inside the system. Then you actually ask for those, for example, your success metrics or upload in the process itself, give you success metrics. And then ultimately you bring that. Does that answer, Anand? I'm not sure.
I hope, Anand, it does answer your question. I also want to... Arpit, you go ahead with your question, but I just want to say hello to Ravi.
Yes.
Thank you for both joining today and coming on the screen. For everybody's background, Ravi is the founder CEO of MoEngage. For a change, I can say this is one company where we had a chance to partner at an early stage in our past life. So, Ravi, thank you for joining. Arpit, sorry, back to you.
Actually, I have a question for actually anybody on the panel. If you think of in the early stages as you are trying to set up just the very basic tools for figuring out what is there in your product, like what's happening in the product, right? So is there a basic sort of a stack which says, look, boss, for tracking this type of data, here are 2-3 tools. For tracking this type of data, here are 2, and then for reporting as well. Like just like the very basics to start off with, and then you add on in complexity.
I think Praveen has given the answer, but maybe I'll add. Do add basically event tracking, any event tracking system, be it Mixpanel, whatsoever you figure it out. Please do have a full story kind of any screen capture solution, right? I know there's a question, I think Krishna, maybe that's another time I'll ask. We do for enterprise also. So there's a way to do that. So you do that because early on, the watching that user journey is super important to have that. From performance perspective, look at any APM. APM is generally, if they are comprehensive, that's good. If not, sometimes people forget the front-end side measurement. Sentries become really powerful. For if you look at page load and all, mixed panel, if you try, you can bring that event, but that's not that great. If you go for Sentry kind of tool, they have really you can benchmark and a lot of those things. You can think of that kind of a basic setup to start with.
Got it. Understood.
Actually, Ravi, since you're on the call as well, um, I will just read out a question from one of the users. I know that Deepak already gave his perspective, will be because you have a lot of enterprise customers. The question is that screen recording is interesting, and typically people would want to do it in the early stages in particular because they want to figure out user behavior. But do enterprise customers agree for screen recordings? And seems like it's an intrusive way of doing it, and how do you get them to agree to do it? So would love to know whether you did it or not. And if you did, how did you get their agreement to doing it in the first place?
Okay. I mean, first I wasn't aware that we can't do it. I mean, until you asked me this question. So
that's the best answer. Just don't ask for permission. Just go do it.
So we have been using LogRocket. I mean, I think it's something similar to very full story. I think. Yeah, I mean, we have been using it for a while. It's not only for product understanding what people are doing, but also for even for support, right? You typically get a lot of support tickets. I'm not able to do something. And many times you need to do a lot of back and forth. And instead of doing that, your support agent can just look at what exactly the customer was doing, what was the cookies in that browser and so on, and then fix it much faster. So we use it for multiple purposes, but okay, I think I'll go back and check if there are any kind of opt-ins that we should do on this front. Now that you asked, yeah. We do it for all our dashboard users, irrespective of whether they're from enterprise or mid-market or SMB. Yeah.
Just to add, even we use LogRocket and generally been very, very helpful for us in terms of getting to that root cause of what was an issue. So yeah, to the extent that it matters, would recommend that product.
Yeah, we found that screen recording is not a very popular thing actually. So our customers were the large apparel brands like Nike, Adidas, and all these guys, and they were like, "There's no way you can actually do anything on screen recording with us." So I mean, it's probably a mixed bag. I mean, it depends the kind of customers you get. We probably got the difficult ones.
So I'll tell you. I mean, we have. I mean, Alok knows almost enterprise, like mega enterprise, super enterprise. We still do it. So what you need to understand, there's a PII concept. That's where they differ. And these systems allows you to kind of, if one of a developer knows to code, right, you can filter not to capture the PII when they capture, right? And that's one part. A little bit of basically, if you have advanced feature set enabled, you can actually do that. Second is you need to work with your sub-processor list in your contract itself. So this will help you to eliminate those things. And in fact, these things are so powerful now. It allows you to configure, hey, on this page let's not record, on this page let's record. So it's an effort if you.
And building on that one, Deepak, just how frequently, like if let's say we are using third-party tools within our product, right, for measurement and for sending data back. So the PII or privacy related concerns, how frequently has that concern increased in recent times, and then are there best practices to manage those? Because people would say, we like what you are doing, but then here are 5 other tools that you have brought which we don't know. Does that happen?
No. So basically, see, the type of clarity, like for example, during the contract itself, you share the sub-processor. Like let's say if you're mixed panel, full story, objectives, jobs, what is captured, what is not captured, right? So you get flagged basically. If it is, it gets flagged there itself. Generally, enterprises look for that, and then you have to work around. You have to have those processes, because after that there's an audit also. Like for example, you show those certificates of be it GDPR, CCPA, whatsoever compliance. Exactly. That covers this PII element itself. So those kind of validates them.
Understood. No, thanks. That helps.
Okay. Let me take a question from the Q&A panel here from Rajagopalan here. And the first one is addressed directly to Praveen. And I'll take one of his 2 questions, which is that, what can you give an example to everyone of a feature that you thought will take off really well, but as you began to look at the user behavior, you find that there hasn't been user acceptance for that feature?
Yeah. Have a clear example in mind, right? So yeah, we are building an analytics product. Think of it as Amplitude, but for marketing teams. So not focused on the product manager audience at all. So one of the features that we had was, kind of measuring your key events. So it was it could be anything like website sessions, it could be form submissions on the website, it could be time spent on a page, etc., etc. And yeah, we called it event analytics, right? Like as is done in most product analytics solutions. And obviously, I have at least kind of been used to the whole event analytics system. So it was super intuitive for me to kind of say there is an event and you can kind of measure, aggregate on top of it. And we realized that that just doesn't fly with marketers, right? Or majority of the marketers are used to thinking in terms of KPIs or metrics, right? Not events and aggregations of properties and so on and so forth. So that was a feature which would have been very useful, would have been very powerful, but it just didn't speak the language that the customer understood. Was it where they said, hey, I think of it in terms of a KPI or a measure. I don't really care whether the event underneath that was like a form submit, or I don't even want to know what the name of that was. There is a KPI that I care about and I just want to see that directly, right? So we had to move that as close to a Excel metric dimension sort of a experience as possible. And that's what we'd be kind of, we've not yet done it. It's something that we'd be launching next month. Where you bring in a layer of abstraction about the event analytics, event analytics is, I think, well established as the main way to kind of track key events that users do, but bringing in a layer of abstraction above it called KPIs, which you can measure with some simple breakdowns, right? So this was one thing, probably not being very close to customers was the reason why it happened that way. So.
Got it. And I'll ask one other of his questions. And while he has addressed it to Deepak, I'm actually going to ask it to Ravi here, which is that, and this is for more engages product here, which is that, is there, because of product analytics, is there a feature or a capability that you have actually shut down in your product?
Okay, got it. I think in our case, obviously over the years, we've had actually a lot of capabilities that we have built over like 7 years of our lifespan. So I think many capabilities and as we measure, like in terms of, for example, I remember something called, like, just for everyone's background, we are a customer analytics and engagement platform primarily for B2C businesses. And we do have some B2B businesses also using our product, like SaaS businesses like InVideo, SquadStack, and a few others, but we focus primarily more on B2C businesses. And for B2C businesses, and especially on mobile apps, like we used to do something called uninstall analytics. Okay. And which used to be very important. It just like had that high sort of hype around like in 2015, 2016 and so on, like where are people uninstalling from, what are the different reasons why they're uninstalling, did they receive so many notifications before uninstall and so on, right? It had that hype, but it wasn't something like we felt that will be kind of long term, and we have seen that sort of the need going down specifically only on uninstall analytics. We obviously had built a separate capability. We had to kind of completely kind of sunset that part and then kind of put it in a different form in our behavioral analytics product. So yeah, I think definitely multiple such types of, we have different types of campaigns that we had, and we had to kind of sunset few types of campaigns and so on. So yeah, I think there are multiple such products. And there might be multiple products which only be used only by certain small segment of customers, but still matters to those super enterprise customers, like you said, right? Like Deepak was also mentioning, but it's you have to build for some super enterprise customers. So yeah.
Got it. Go ahead, Arpit. If you have a question, you go ahead.
No, actually, I was taking up a question which was there in the Q&A panel, which was, and this is more interesting. See, if you're creating plugins on top of, say, a Zoho or a Salesforce, right? And while this question is specifically on screen recording, I have a slightly more broader question. Oftentimes, you can be quite limited by what you can track and what you can't, simply because the platform only gives you so much data. So I'm curious as to, are there ways to figure out how to get more data or the data that we need, or is it not even worth the time to invest in building out stuff on top, because tomorrow Salesforce makes a change and then whatever investment we made in the last 3 months goes for a toss?
Sorry, but could not. I mean, when we think of a screen recording, they actually work on HTML. So I could not get that.
Sorry, I was saying not the screen recording piece. While that was specifically the question in the Q&A panel.
Okay.
I was saying in general, there are a lot of companies who end up building out, SaaS products, which end up being plugins, say on a Shopify or a Salesforce, right? Now over there, you usually are quite limited on the data that you can actually get on usage, because the platform only shares so much data with you. And then, like in case you guys have the experience of having integrated with some of these larger ones, are there ways in which you can get better data or better quality data or build out stuff on top to help you learn what you need to do? Because over here, you're always going to be sort of fighting with one hand behind your back.
Yeah, at least my experience is that there are a couple of alternate companies in our space who have taken that approach of being like a package on top of Salesforce as compared to being like a standalone app, right? So I think in general, that approach has pros and cons in terms of agility, in terms of how quickly you can kind of release and change your product. Those are cons, but the pros obviously are that, distribution on day zero is far easier if you're already a app on top of Salesforce or HubSpot. And some of the concerns around, data is moving out of Salesforce is not there. Likewise for analytics, I think Salesforce is generally kind of mature in terms of having enough sort of hooks where you can kind of listen to a lot of events. But I think there will be limitations for that go-to-market model in terms of how quickly you can iterate, right? Both in terms of analytics as well as in terms of if you want to make a change, if you are tightly coupled and built on top of Salesforce, then it's sort of harder, right? In terms of kind of making that change. So as long as it's worth the benefit of much faster distribution, then it should be okay. Yeah.
Thank you.
Actually, I have a follow-up question to this then, which is that in some of our companies, we are finding that while you have a cloud part of the software, there is actually an on-premise part. Let's take Whatfix as an example. I remember that many of the large enterprises, they said that the flow building software is on the cloud, but the actual flows have to sit on their local server. They can't be on the cloud, right? Similarly, we are in this banking automation company called SignZ. There are lots of things which are actually on-premise. When that happens, how do you do product instrumentation there, and how do you actually collect data about the user behavior in those situations? I don't know if any of you have gone through those situations.
Yeah, we did that once for this super large manufacturer out of US, Mexico. They were making stuff for Nike. They were like, we would deploy your product in our premise because we really can't have stuff outside. So what we did for them is we basically deployed only the front end, and the back end stayed with us. The database, everything stayed with us. Everything was an API call. So we could still do the entire thing as you wanted. But if somebody wants you to completely do on-premise stuff, where you really have a black box to look forward to, the only possible way is to basically probably do a lot of dumps on logs and then read from there. I mean, that was our fallback option which we thought of, but it will not be elegant for sure. I mean, never be very agile or very quick in that perspective.
So Alok, just a clarification. So the question that you asked, is it more like these enterprises saying it should be in my cloud instance, or they're saying that it has to be on-premise, not even on cloud?
In many cases, they are actually saying that it can't be on, it is actually on-premise in their case. And how do you get feedback? How do you get data in these situations?
So one,
both a technology question and also sort of getting the customer to agree to it kind of a question, both.
Yeah. So the one, see, I'm not in that, but definitely dealt with the product. For example, you look at APM itself. You install in your plugin, right? Or sometimes even a video player, right? Yeah. You keep it there. Or even the mobile. If you look at the native mobile, you will build a lot of analytics. Typically, the way they have built, like crash analytics or whatsoever they have built. So the fundamental point is about, again, they need to figure out what's the minimal data you need to transfer. Keep that aggregation there itself, local side, and figure out a sync model to your the application. So reduce that frequency, right? That generally helps. The challenge comes about most in such scenario is white labeling and all. If you're hitting the different URL and all, work with the IT team and all to simplify that. But that's where when the log size is small, transfer is less, network cost is less, on time is there, aggregated there. So you need to figure it out in the app itself what you deploy, basically.
Yeah. I think generally, like one example that I can think of, even our product doesn't fit the bill, but whilst we were working at InMobi, there was a partnership with a major US telecom carrier where some of that telecom data was kind of coming in from the telco into for ad related monetization. It's generally very expensive to do unless the business is really worthwhile and lucrative. It's probably not a great sort of business plan. But what finally worked was a model where there is a agreed on sort of software package which is installed by the telco, which they vet properly, and you don't have to kind of change that afterwards. It goes through all security clearances, checks and balances that needs to happen, and that's installed on their premise. That scrubs the data, cleans the data, removes all PII, ensures regulation wise it's all sorted, and a filtered version of the data kind of comes out, right? The thing being, you really don't want to change that because that is very expensive to do again, get people aligned and so on and so forth.
Got it. There is a question Krishna has put, and I want to ask a more generic version of that question, which is that, it's one thing to instrument the product, whether it's to do screen recordings, other kinds of events, logs. There are so many things that you can track. The challenge with this is that then somebody needs to see this stuff. So as you have built, between you guys, you have built so many companies now. Who is responsible to actually go through all this stuff? And I think, Deepak, you referred to a product ops word at one point in time. I actually wanted to check if that is a function that actually looks through it. If so, what do they do with it? Who do they report to? And at what stage of a company do you begin to set it up?
So there's a one prerequisite to this. Like, for example, when we started seeing the X data, let's say because no product analytics is complete to give a complete picture, right? So as you grow, you also need, like we realize, we also need to know for example, the prospect data or the sales deal you just closed for 20,000 users right now. The developer or a PM, does they know that their new scale is going to be by this much, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of that data which doesn't come together when you're taking the decision, right? Mm-hmm. So the first and foremost thing is now, like, how do you bring all those data together which makes sense? So you might be hearing a lot of internal BI platforms like Metabase and all popping up, right? That's a real need because it's not bringing together, right? So the key objective of if you hire product, so we also have product ops, engineering ops, and there's a concept called depending on the growth of the organization. Now we are setting up the COE, Center of Excellence, product and R&D strategy. Basically, they own basically end-to-end these metrics. So the thing is, like, for example, someone has to own. You put that, hey, these all instruments come together, right? And this helps in where. Then where is like decision making when you're trying to build something. Okay. And many of time we also forget our actually developer the product database. We don't analyze the product database, right? Like, okay, we created so many XYZ already, which has been used, not been used. The mixed panel data will tell you the event in a running motion. But if you forget that what actually you already put down. So how do you bring all those things together to answer 3, 4, 5, whatever the OKR objective which you decided for your R&D team, bring that part. You give that ownership to that product ops team, or you can say R&D ops, strategic ops team. Like, they set up this dashboards. They keep accountability in each team. For example, what we practice is we set up the dashboard for each team separately. Hey, this is the dashboard, and we have a review every month. I personally get involved in a review that where are you moving in this project, and it becomes a habit slowly they started looking at this metrics. It's no longer just a feature. Now these all metrics, how actually moving, it becomes into the part of the sprint. So it's a lot of cadence basically enforcing that. And it took, to be honest, it took almost 6 to 8 months to kind of make a disciplined mindset that this matters.
So who does this product upstream report to then?
So either they can report to a CTO or CPO generally. I mean,
Sorry, Maharaj, I think.
Can I quickly come in on this?
Yeah, absolutely. Please go ahead.
Yeah. So we identified this to be one of the key problems of the business, and I think we were 1.5 years into our journey. So we basically built a team called Data Analytics team, and the head of Data Analytics actually reported to all the founders, because this was a cross-cutting concern. There was data coming from sales, data coming from marketing, data coming from product, data coming from mixed panel, segment, our own databases, log files. So now it was such a huge problem. It's basically entire business's total data in one place. So we built an entire platform, a system there itself, where one person is the head of the entire process. And then there are multiple functionaries around who will basically aggregate and make sure the whole data is understood extremely well. We were probably extremely KPI driven. So we had 600 business KPIs for the business to track, even at startup stage. So it was good. The thing that I just want to put together here is that mixed panel was giving us extremely high quality event driven data, but it's not giving me information about the exact business outcomes that my customers were getting, which was only possible to get from the databases that my product team will give me. Then you had questions coming from your analytics based on user behaviors and stuff. You have database coming from your ticketing and everything else. So we built a team. Head of data analytics was a role which was given to a person who had like 18 years of experience in statistical analysis and everything else. And again, we eventually from that we came down to some very interesting findings. We found that there are certain KPIs have a direct correlation to churn and some don't. So we actually, in the day, we ended up building like 1,000+ Pearson correlation models, out of which 21 were very, very accurate, which could give me with a 95% accuracy that if this happens, then that will happen, which was an extremely important analytics I think we can get from all these products if you can put them all together in one place. But it's a very heavy work, and if it works, when we figure out very quickly that if it report only to a CTO, then the customer success will be underserved. If it report to the customer success, then the CPO will not work. So it had to report to this team had to report to the founders. So it became the operating cadence, the system for the entire business to keep all the data together and keep it alive, which was a hard job.
Understand.
One question, at least I wanted to pick up from the Q&A panel, and something which, so Krishna has asked this, and basically there are just so many tools, right? So at what point do you say that we have enough tools? And are there any rules of thumb which say that boss ab ho gaya yaar, matlab isse zyada aur kya data lenge? So again, if
and also the cost, he has a question on the cost also.
The rule of thumb around, either could be a cost,
how much would you spend?
Yeah, I think one thing I'd say is I think having something like Segment, I think there was one question on tech stack as well. I think having something like Segment really helps you to experiment, try out as much as you would want from a analytics layer perspective. But yeah, I think more tools generally are problematic. I think one dashboard for product analytics would be the best way to kind of go about it. Only one caveat I'd add is, at the same time, trying to stuff everything into a product analytics solution might also be counterproductive, because if you start instrumenting every possible event and click in your product into any of the product analytics solutions, I think the usability of the product for any new person who comes into the company really kind of goes down. So generally, the approach that at least I have found great use is the questions which are most relevant 80% of the time, that goes to the product analytics solution. The really 20% micro use cases go to a data warehouse, and that's not solved for unless there is an explicit question, right? And being very rigid about it to say this is only supposed to be for the 80% of the folks. For the 20% power users, you can always go to a data warehouse and do whatever you would want to do.
Got it.
Anybody wants to put a number on the table? I mean, What does it cost? You're an early stage SaaS company. You have just raised maybe seed funding just to put a stake in the ground, right? And you're building how much would you spend on these tools?
I think you'll probably get free by then.
Yeah.
I think all this segment, Mixpanel and all this, some of these companies all have starter packs.
If you figure it out, some good open source like Snowplow, if you know, is a good alternative of segment. A really good alternative, but that needs a good developer.
Yeah.
So basically, I mean, there's a you figure out a trade-off, right? And then but I think thinking from tool perspective, that's a mistake that a lot of I mean in past I also do. Rather think from what is actually matters to measure. Is it changing? Right. That kind of pushes you whether we need 2 or 3 or we need to just mix the data. I mean, that's the.
All right. Maybe one, I think Shashank had raised your hand. So Shashank.
Yeah, I guess you get to ask the last question.
I guess, yeah, this might end up being the last question, but let's see.
Sorry, no, I don't have a question. This was just a mistake.
Oh, okay. No worries. No worries. Actually, I was going to ask you guys a question on open source also, that are there good open source? But I think Deepak, you already answered that on Snowflow. Given that there is no other question and we are really nearing the end of the time, and we always say that we'll not go beyond our time in these discussions. So I think today we are going to close a minute early for a change. So I want to thank Praveen, Deepak, Manasej, Ravi, and Shashank also in the end. Thank you so much for being there. Thank you to all the audience as well. I always remind people, please do this session happen. I think we need to thank, I think Krishna was the one who suggested that we should do a SaaS talk on this topic. Please do write to us, whatever format works for you. Write to us in that format, either to Arpit or to I. Please send your comments on which topic we can choose. And even if you have some anchor guests in mind saying, look, these will be the right people to ask these questions to, please do reach out to us. Thank you.
Always a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.